Confucianism was founded by Confucius, 551 to 479 BCE, and has been a way of life followed by countless millions of Chinese for over 2,000 years. Over the centuries, it spread to all parts of China and to neighboring countries, especially Japan and Korea. Emperor Wu of the Han Dynasty established appointments for textual specialists of the Confucian classics and thereby reputedly initiated Confucianism's ascendancy to the imperial ideology and state cult of China. Until 1905, Chinese civil service exams were focused on Confucian doctrine, although the influence of Confucianism has decreased markedly in mainland China since the victory of communism in the year 1947. It still has many followers in neighboring countries, especially that of Korea, and in the West thanks to the overseas Chinese and their fans. As in the case of Jainism and Buddhism, which we have discussed earlier, there is disagreement among scholars over whether Confucianism is an atheistic religion. Part of the problem of correctly interpreting Confucianism is that early Christian missionary scholars tried to make the ancient Chinese teachings more easily translatable into Christian theological doctrines, and later secular scholars and reformers had their own agendas as well. For example, Jesuit scholars in the 17th and 18th centuries argued that since Confucianism was basically an ethical system, its followers could be converted to Christianity without giving up their own views. Later, a Protestant missionary scholar, such as James Legge from 1815 to 1897, argued that although Confucius himself was a religious skeptic, the traditional view of heaven held by the common people was the true God of the Christian religion. In the first half of the 20th century, interpretations of Confucian doctrines tended to be motivated not by religious goals, but by the wish to discover a rational mode of thinking in China's past that justified its entrance into the modern world. Thus, the scholar and modernist reformer Hu Xi, from 1891 to 1962, maintained from a Chinese point of view that although Confucius was an agnostic humanist, his views were submerged in a cultural context of superstition. On the other hand, the scholar Hurley Creel in 1935 cited passages from Confucius's writings to refute the view that Confucius was an agnostic. By 1949, however, Creel was no longer convinced of his earlier religious interpretation and returned to the agnostic ethical interpretation of Confucius of earlier centuries. Of course, we do not even know to this day whether or not Confucius actually existed. Given this interpretive history, it is small a wonder that it is difficult to determine whether Confucius believed in God. Consider the contrasting readings in a sample of reference books. Pike maintains that there is no God or pantheon in Confucianism. However, he does not explain what is meant by God. According to Wing Sit Chan, although Confucius did not believe in an anthropomorphic God, he held that heaven was a cosmic, spiritual, moral power. Chan also points out that Confucius prayed, attended sacrifices, and even swore by heaven. Although Chan does not draw this inference, these actions may mean that Confucius held a personal view of God and did not merely believe in a spiritual, moral power. Rejecting the usual translation of heaven, Herbert Giles understands the term to refer to a personal deity in Confucian literature. He argues that Confucius not only believed in the existence of the deity of his fathers, quote, more vaguely perhaps than did the anthropomorphic worshippers of early times, but he was conscious and expressed his consciousness openly that in his teaching he was working under divine guidance, end quote. Giles also shows that Confucius very probably believed in various spiritual beings as well. When asked what constituted wisdom, Confucius replied, quote, to cultivate earnestly our duty towards our neighbors and to reverence spiritual beings, while maintaining always a due reserve, may be called wisdom, end quote. He also said, quote, how abundantly do spiritual beings make their presence manifest among us, end quote. Although Giles's evidence does not show that Confucius believed in a personal God, it does suggest that he believed in some supernatural beings, and that a belief in a personal God would therefore not have been completely foreign to him. In addition, he also shows that Mencius, living from around the late 4th century BCE to 289 BCE, a sage second only in importance to Confucius himself in Confucian literature, believed in God, and a rather anthropomorphic God at that. Again, although this does not demonstrate that Confucius himself believed in a personal God, it does indicate that a personal God is to be found in some of the Confucian thought, and suggests that it is not implausible that Confucius himself held a belief in a personal God. However, some Confucian scholars who came after Mencius, most notably was Sun Tzu, 298 to 238 BCE, and Wang Chong, CE 27 to 100, gave Confucius's thought a naturalistic interpretation. For example, Sun Tzu was very concerned to combat what he considered superstitious practices such as praying for rain, and Wang Chong gave a materialistic explanation of the origin of the universe. In sum, there is some evidence that suggests that Confucius did believe in some form of a supreme being or God, or some form of spirits or deities, although just how personal his view of God was is a matter of controversy, since in any case it seems very likely that he believed in various spiritual beings. We can conclude that Confucius was probably not an atheist in the broad sense of rejecting belief in all gods. Whether he was an atheist in the narrow sense of rejecting belief in the theistic God is not completely certain. It should be emphasized that even if he did believe in some supreme being, there is no evidence that he believed in a being that is all good, all knowing, all powerful, and a creator of the universe. Indeed, it seems unlikely that he held such a view. Thus, it is not implausible to suppose that Confucius was a negative atheist in the narrow sense, that is, he did not hold the view that an all good, all knowing, and all powerful God exists. There is not enough evidence to speculate intelligently about whether he was a positive atheist in the narrow sense, that is, whether he disbelieved that such a God exists, or whether he gave rational arguments for his atheism. Now, it might be maintained that the essential aspects of Confucian thought, namely its moral philosophy, and of course, if you look in our philosophy playlist, we have a playlist on Chinese philosophy. It might be maintained that the essential aspects of Confucian thought concerning its moral philosophy can be divorced from belief in God and spiritual beings, and it might further be urged that Confucius's views are humanistic in nature, in that they emphasize the value of human beings and the cultivation of human learning and virtues. But although these claims may well be true, it is important to stress that humanism in several of its senses is compatible with belief in God. And although Confucianism can be interpreted in purely secular terms, Confucius did not do so. Virtue and right conduct were tied, in his view, to following the way of heaven, and at least on some interpretations they were tied to following the way of a personal God. This is not to deny that one may eliminate belief in a God and spiritual beings from Confucianism itself, and follow Confucius's teachings concerning virtue and right conduct. Indeed, some later Confucian scholars did seem to interpret Confucius's views in naturalistic terms. For these people, at least, Confucianism in this modified form is an atheistic religion in the broad sense of the term. Now that we have seen that there are in fact atheistic living religions, the question is atheism anti-religious? And this has a quick answer. Since some religions are atheistic in the narrow sense, atheism is not necessarily opposed to religion. Further, although Jainism, Buddhism, and Confucianism are not atheistic in the broad sense of the term, it would seem to be possible to eliminate any god or gods from these religions without practical import, for the way to spiritual salvation and the way of life that is specified by these religions would not seem to be affected to any major extent by eliminating all gods. A more interesting question is whether an atheist in the narrow sense of the term must in all consistency oppose any religion that requires of its members belief in an all-good, all-powerful, and all-knowing God. Of course, yes, an atheist must be opposed to the theological beliefs of the religion, but this is compatible with an admiration for other aspects of the religion, not necessarily its supernatural beliefs. Recall that according to Alston, ritual acts that focus on sacred objects and a moral code, believed to be sanctioned by the gods, are religious-making characteristics. An atheist could admire the rituals of a theistic religion on aesthetic grounds without believing that the objects in the ritual itself are sacred. An atheist could maintain that the ethical code of a theistic religion is correct while rejecting the idea that God sanctioned it. Recall as well that according to Beardsley, a religion consists not only in a set of interrelated religious beliefs providing answers to all the basic questions regarding religious systems, but in attitudes and practices determined by those beliefs. An atheist could argue that the attitudes and the practices determined by the beliefs of a religion are very worthwhile to emulate, and yet maintain that the actual beliefs that determine these attitudes and practices are unjustified or even false. In conclusion, although I have argued that atheism itself is not a religion, I have maintained that certainly Jainism, probably Buddhism, and perhaps even Confucianism are atheistic in the narrow sense of the term, after noting the belief in some sort of God or gods or deities. In all three of these religions, I have also suggested that they could get along without any belief in any gods. Consequently, it seems that these religions could be construed as atheistic in the broad sense without significant loss. And finally, since there are atheistic religions, it follows that atheism and religion do not necessarily stand in opposition to one another. Atheists can even support aspects of theistic religions, for instance, aesthetic and moral grounds.